So feel free to stop me at any point with questions. I may or may not have the answers, but feel free to stop me and ask me questions anytime during the talk. So, let me make sure. So, when you go to the doctor, he always measures, or she always measures your height and your body mass. And that's because your body mass is a very important determinant of your health. And so here we have, I think this is a great picture of baboons on an African safari. And they're coming back to the scale to weigh themselves every year. Graduate student from Harvard put this out there. And they come back and they weigh themselves to see if they're doing okay. And you can see this guy's pushing down, making him think that he really is.
Cheer.
But body temperature as well as body mass are two of the important predictors of whether an animal is doing well. And so animals that hibernate, they need to be able to survive winters in the environment, and they need to gain body mass to be able to survive. And usually that gain of mass is in the form of fat. Let me see if I got this right. Whoops. So today, or this evening, I should say, I'd like to talk about why hibernators hibernate and what we can learn from these animals that hibernate. So we'll first talk about who are the hibernators, what is hibernation, and there are many definitions of it that I think you'll be surprised about. What is torpor compared to hibernation? And then I'll talk about my research area, what we've been investigating. And I have to say that I am now dutifully on transition, meaning I'm basically retired from CSU now. So I've raised the white flag and told the Marmots I'm not trapping them anymore. and visit with me, and we can talk.
Congrats.
Yeah. So we'll talk about some interesting aspects of hibernation that these animals manifest, which are really and truly amazing. So if we look at the phylogenetic distribution of mammals that are capable of torpor and hibernation, it's quite interesting. They range from the monotremes, where you've got an echidna that actually can hibernate. You've got different forms of Australian mammals, echidnas and these elephant shrews. You've got our North American ground squirrels, bears, bats, and dormice. So throughout the whole classification of what we call the order of mammals, all of them show some forms of being able to drop their body temperature to low levels and rewarm themselves again. And that means then that the genes must have originated a long time ago. They're on all the orders. They must have originated way back at the beginning of the order of Mammalia. So this is very, very fascinating to us. And as I say, we've got ground squirrels, hamsters, chipmunks, dormice in Europe, bats, hedgehog, echidnas, and then a bird sneaks in there. There is very good evidence that the common poorwill, or nighthawks that we see here actually, can drop their body temperature during a very cold spell and rewarm themselves in a good environment. In other words, there's a fair amount of heat coming from the sun. So they use both sun as well as some shivering to warm themselves back up again. So the model animals that I use are the golden mantle ground squirrel, Callus Merophis lateralis. It has a summer weight of about 150 grams and a winter weight of close to 300. Wow. So we're talking about animals that can nearly double their body mass in size. Okay. Yellow-bellied marmots also double their body mass over the course of the late summer and early fall. So in terms of, we don't want to do that.
We wouldn't survive.
And in essence, these guys would be called yo-yo dieters because of the way they gain gain weight and lose weight all winter, all year long. So if we think about it, these animals have to gain that mass because during the wintertime, there's no food available. They go underground, as we'll talk about, underground, and they basically stop eating and hibernate. And that's one of the mysteries of hibernation is what allows them to say, I've eaten enough, I've got enough fat on me, I'm going to go ahead and go down in my burrow and remain in my burrow. That's the other important thing, that they go down in their burrow, they don't come back up, even when they do arouse occasionally, they go down in their burrow, they stay down in their burrow from about September, October to April, March, late March, April. So they're down in their burrow and they don't eat. And
is that indicated by a cold snap or something, or the?
Good question. It's actually a circadian rhythm, okay? Meaning that it's timed by an endogenous rhythm inside their body, and cold and light will fine-tune the rhythm. So if it's warmer a little bit longer in the fall, they'll stay awake a little bit longer, but eventually they'll go down below. It doesn't matter if it stays hot or not. Similarly, if it gets stale, if they have gotten very fat and it's been a good growing season and they're up to body mass, they'll go down and they stay down. I mean, they want to avoid the big cats that you all are going to learn about on August. They want to avoid the predators that are out and about, coyotes, eagles, bobcats, mountain lions. They want to avoid all those. So this is a rhythm that occurs endogenously in these animals. So, as I said, I mostly studied the yellow-bellied marmots and the golden ground squirrel, and as you can see, they make a nest kind of underneath the burrow. This is our interpretation, or my interpretation of what their nest looks like underneath the ground. I've never miniaturized myself enough to get down into the burrow and see what is actually down there. So I had to do this for a PBS Nova screen filming. And so, they asked me, well, what does it look like down there? I said, I don't know. It's something like this, I think. I see them carrying a lot of hay material, and they're big rocks, and they want to keep their burrow away from badgers and weasels and everything else. So I assume that it looks something like that. So hibernation, what is it? It's a state of inactivity brought about by short day lengths, winter, at which they can predict, they understand that it's going to start getting cold from the shortening of the photoperiod, and there's no food for them in the environment. The food is basically dried up and gone. And
What do they eat? What do they eat?
So they eat vegetation. Although, if John gets hit by a car, they won't let his body go to waste. They'll go. You'll see them along the side of the road, gnawing on John that didn't make it across the road. They will become omnivorous for a short period of time, i.e., they'll eat, their own kin. Or, they're not going to let energy go to waste in this kind of environment. So, but in general, they are herbivores. They eat plant material, and we'll talk more about the kinds of plant material that they prefer in a minute. So, as I sort of mentioned earlier, hibernation is characterized by a drop in body temperature, which we actually call torpor, or drop in body temperature is called a torpor bout, as you'll see. Reduced metabolic rate, so their metabolic rate, that is the oxygen that they utilize, drops from about to about a 50th of what it would be normally. So their heart rate, as you'll see in a second, will drop from about 300 beats per minute to 2. Wow. Yeah. So, and you'll see. So it's they have a dramatic lowering of all physiological processes, and they survive on energy reserves such as fat. So hence we go back to during the summer, right now, all of the animals are trying to gain weight in the form of fat to be able to make it through the winter period. They'll hibernate for several months, but they don't remain completely inactive. They actually go through periods of arousal where they come back up out of hibernation, that is from low body temperature, and they'll fix up their nest, finish a chapter in their book, and then they'll go back down again. So since I've never been down in the burrow, I'm not sure what else they do. But during the winter, animals can still freeze to death. If you have winter up here where there's very little snow and very cold temperatures, the frost line goes very low. And that frost line is what will kill the animals if they get, so that they're hibernating or trying to hibernate above the frost line. Okay? Normally, if you have a good snowpack, the frost line is very high, or not even existing. You can go into the subnivean space beneath the snow pack, and it's still above freezing. So they want the best winter for them is an early winter, lots of snow, and the snow remains until probably March or April. But it's starting to go away, so the plants are starting to come up. So winter hibernation is the period between October and November until about the end of March or April. Summer estivation. Now there are animals that want to beat the heat like we do during the summer, and they actually will burrow. These are like the Mojave ground squirrel down in the Death Valley. They will actually go into what's called a summer estivation. They'll go down into a burrow and drop their body temperature and try to stay cool because of the heat of the summer in the Mojave Desert. Hibernation is basically that time period when the animals will undergo the torpor bouts. Torpor is the decrease in body temperature, which can last hours, days, or weeks, and in the case of bats, even months. But the animals are always able to rewarm themselves using their own heat. And that's the difference between a lot of animals, including ourselves, that drop their body temperature, but then they become hypothermic because they can't rewarm themselves unless you give them heat. So ectotherms, snakes, lizards, okay, frogs, they all are dependent upon ambient temperature to rewarm themselves. They can't rewarm. If you keep them in a cold environment, they can't warm themselves up to above ambient temperature. Okay. Dormancy is what insects do. Insects basically will allow themselves to just drop to ambient temperature and will remain dormant all the way until the springtime. So the weather warms.
What is brumation? Brumation? That reptiles do?
Yeah.
Is it called brumation?
It is, sometimes I've seen that term, brumation, yeah, which is a form of dormancy, basically. It's a form of dormancy. Okay, so are all hibernators the same? No. Some are classified as deep hibernators, where they'll stay down for weeks or months, like the marmot and the bats. Then you also have bears, okay? Bears are very interesting. People will ask, well, do they actually hibernate? Well, they do. They drop their body temperature, but they don't drop their body temperature to near ambient, like ground squirrels and marmots do. They drop their body temperature about 6 to 7 degrees, and that's enough of a metabolic savings that bears don't have to lower their body temperature any lower. And in reality, they can't, or I should say they don't, because imagine how much energy you must have as a 300-kilogram bear, how much energy you must have to warm yourself up from 5 degrees back up to 30 degrees every month or so. You just can't put on your person, you can't put on enough fat to be able to rewarm yourselves that often. So bears, they let their body temperature drop just a little bit, and that's enough of a savings. Consequently, do not walk into a bear cave during the winter, because the animal is basically sleeping and letting its body temperature drop about 6 to 8 degrees. And there's been some very famous anecdotes about people getting their body temperature taken by a bear when they thought they were going to go in and get the bear's body temperature. Bears are quite able to move around and know when there's danger, even though they are in hibernation. But they do fit the category of being a hibernator. They drop their body temperature, although not to ambient, and they also do not feed during that time period. So bears will not eat the whole time period that they are undergoing hibernation.
What about pulse and respiration?
Pulse respiration is extremely low for bears. Absolutely. It goes remarkably low. In fact, there was just a recent science article 2 or 3 years ago that showed that their metabolism is actually suppressed, it's actually inhibited. So to get their metabolism really low, even though their body temperature is only dropping about 6 to 8 degrees. So they do suppress their metabolism. And DARPA is trying to give us money to figure out how we can suppress the metabolism of a human by giving them, something that the bear must have.
So do they actually come out of hibernation or walk around? That's what I've heard.
They can do it.
Okay,
Generally, they do not do it.
okay.
But if they're disturbed, they will. They can come out. Now, this is mostly black bears that I'm talking about. Grizzlies and polar bears, the Arctic brown bears, are a little different. The males don't hibernate. The females do. So the males wander all winter long and have to find food. Grizzlies, both male and females, hibernate. But remember, females give birth during the winter. So they're in their young, in their den with the suckling young, and they are still in this sort of hibernation state during that time period. But as I said, they will defend during that time period. So, and black bears will as well. So he's really just should leave it as well. Now the DOW is upset right now because of the global warming and climate change, because the bears are coming out earlier and and there's no food available yet. So now they're raiding people's houses. I'm sure Glacier View has got the same problems that a lot of other communities up in the mountains have, and that is, you've got to have bear-proof cans. You just can't feed them, and you really want to try to keep away from them. So lots of animals show different forms of torpor. Mice actually undergo torpor for a day, for a few hours, to save energy and then come back up again. That's what's called daily torpor. So they don't drop their body temperature as low as many of the other deep hibernators do, but they do try to save energy. So if you're getting the idea that dropping your body temperature, undergoing torpor, is an energy savings mechanism, you're absolutely right. That's the evolution of torpor and hibernation. It's an energy savings mechanism, because if you drop your body temperature and your metabolic rate and your breathing rate and everything else, you're using less energy, a lot less energy. And therefore, you can survive a period when there's no food a lot longer than somebody who's trying to keep their body temperature up high and is using a lot more oxygen and energy than you are, because you're in this dormant state. Now, you are almost catatonic. You can't move very easily or very well at all, so you're subjected to predation. Hence, you go down in a burrow, you plug the burrow, and you hope that no weasel or badger knows about it.
Does that happen to humans? Because when I wake up, especially in the winter, I'm cold in the morning.
Well, there could be lots of reasons for that. What I will say is that, yes, humans also have a circadian rhythm and body temperature. So if you record your body temperature on an hourly basis, and I encourage my students to do this. They record their body temperature on an hourly basis for about a week. They see a very nice rhythm in body temperature. It's about 2 degrees, not, as you'll see, 25 degrees or 30 degrees. So when you wake up in the morning and during the late night, around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, your body temperature reaches nadir. So it's down, it's very low. Okay, for the rest of the morning, it will start to rise. So it's very natural for people in the middle of the night, from anywhere from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. to feel cold, because their body temperature has dropped and will not start to increase again and get up to a high point up until about 1 or so, 1 in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we do have an intrinsic change in body temperature that is our own circadian rhythm. Okay, and the best sleep that you'll get is when your sleep-wake cycle and your body temperature rhythm are synchronized, meaning that you go to sleep when your body temperature starts falling. Okay, and that's why I tell people who have sleep problems, go out and exercise in the afternoon, early evening. Don't eat a big meal, because then you're producing heat from digestion. Go out, exercise during the day, eat a light meal, and then turn off your cell phone, put light stimulates you, turn off your cell phone at least an hour before you want to go to bed, and as your body temperature starts to drop, that's when you want to go to sleep. And you'll get into that rhythm and you'll be fine. And your body temperature and your sleep-wake cycle will synchronize over time. So that's very important. And what you're also going to see from my talk is that animals that were able to hibernate successfully in the beginning, when mammals were first evolved, those animals that were able to drop their body temperature lower and lower saved more energy than animals that didn't. So hibernation evolved from sleep. And there's some good records of humans, particularly in caves in Europe, who, for whatever reason, people got body temperature records and showed what they were doing. And their records show that the humans that allowed their body temperature to drop pretty far actually survived periods of drought and famine like that much better, and was able to reproduce the next year. So. Okay, so we're talking about heart rate. So this is typical. Here's a normal heart rate, several hundred beats per minute. Here's the heart rate in hibernation. Okay. I gave a talk to a medical group several years ago, and I showed them this, and I showed them the EKG that goes along with this, and the EKG is flat. And they said, no, that animal is dead. I said, no, he's not dead. He's far from dead. But as you can see, their heart rate drops tremendously. Their body temperature is right just above ambient. And as I said, if he was dead, ambient temperature and body temperature would be the same. But in fact, body temperature is slightly above, just a half a degree to a degree above ambient temperature, because they are still alive. But they undergo these arousals. And we don't know why they arouse. That's a whole other seminar and topic. But that's the EKG pattern of the dormouse. So here is a typical summer animal, my ground squirrels. You see their body temperature is up around 35 degrees. And what you notice immediately is that there's a time all of a sudden when the animal says, oh, it's time to hibernate, and they drop their body temperature. So the ambient temperature here is 5 degrees. And you can see they're dropping right just above 5 degrees. And they're remaining down there for weeks at a time. And then arousing. These are the interval arousals, as they're called, in the wintertime. And so those are torpor bouts, and this is the interval arousals. We don't know why they arouse, unless it's to finish their book. We really don't know why they arouse, because they don't move around, they come up, they don't go above ground.
Would they survive if they didn't have that interval arousal?
Would they survive? Well, the opposite question was actually asked, because it's an easier experiment. We asked, what happens if you don't let them hibernate? Okay? And what happens is they don't live as long. Okay? And so there's something to that, but we don't know whether it's based on energy. The reason why somebody did that experiment was to show, or to disprove, the heart rate theory, which was that humans and all mammals had a certain number of heart rates in their lifetime. Okay? So this is
Sound like a president we have there.
so this is a bad situation, because that means that athletes who increase their heart rate should be dying a lot sooner than the couch potatoes, right? Than the couch potatoes. So there was that prediction. There was also the prediction that animals that hibernate, they drop their heart rate, that they should live longer than if you kept them alive. And that was upheld. That was true. That if you didn't let them hibernate, they actually died sooner. But we'd also determined it was not based on heart rate. It was not due to heart rate, fortunately.
So does that mean about every 6 or 7 days they
Yeah.
Papa.
come up?
Yeah, they come up. They come up. Now, this is in a lab. I'm just going to let you know.
Sure.
You'll see some field data in a minute. Because in the field, we don't have compressors going. We don't have the animal care people coming in and checking their cages and waking them up, as many of you may know. And so in the field, their bouts are much longer because it's nice, quiet, and nobody's bothering them. But they still show the same characteristic pattern.
Isn't there a certain lifespan to how many times your cells can turn over? And when they're in hibernation, do their cells turn over?
No, your cells do not turn over, and that's a topic of research right now. That a number of people are looking at the centrioles and how long cells can survive. Because the cells basically stop dividing as they go below about 15 degrees Celsius. So when they get to be about here, DNA synthesis completely is arrested. And a colleague of mine, Sandy Martin, actually has been studying ribosomes and RNA and DNA and determined that once they're down to here, they're not. So they'll get replenishment here. They can get new transcripts done, but there's not a lot of cell turnover. So how do we study them? We do above ground studies for 4 or 5 months while the animals are above ground and we're able to see them. We do field observations, we do lab experiments as well. And so my students and I have studied them in the field and we've studied them in the lab. And then when we find out something interesting in the lab, we then go back out and put telemeters and stuff into the animals in the field to see, well, is this what they really do in the field? And so we do both. So here's some of the field observations. I've had sites with colleagues up in Alaska. These are some Alaska marmots. We're out observing them all in the field. They're kind of neat. And then we did a diet and territory selection study right here at Red Feather Lakes. And I have to give kudos to the Fox Acres Country Club. They allowed us to basically have their whole site as a marmot and ground squirrel site, and it was just wonderful because they were really interested in studying and were always asking me, well, when are you going to tag that marmot? And, what's that guy doing? And this guy's breaking into my shed. I need to get him. And so I was definitely looking at them there and studying them up at Fox Acres. And so some of the culprits we brought into the lab, and the good ones, we left them out of the field. The ones that weren't bothering people, we left out of the field. So they had like eye buttons in them, which records their body temperature and sometimes their activity, heart rate monitors as well. So we were recording them naturally out in the field, which was really nice. And they were also gracious enough to give us the eye buttons back the next year, so that way we would be able to see what had happened over the course of the hibernation period. And by giving back, I mean we caught them and did surgery on them. But we had lots of different sites and lots of field experiments, and I even was doing it when I had broken femur there, or leg, or lower leg. And then my students were trapped in these. She got her PhD now at the University of Alaska, and she's got a job in Tennessee. She went on to Harvard Medical School and got her PhD at Ohio State, and did a postdoc at Harvard, and now she's working for ended up working for McKinsey, a big consulting firm in diagnostic medical equipment and medical stuff. So the students have all done well, and that's my job, is to make sure that they do as well or better than me. And let's see, what is that? Oh, well, occasionally we catch something other than a marmot. We do catch fox. We catch skunks, and I make the students take the skunk out if they leave the traps open too long and we get a skunk. But the bait we use to catch the marmots catches everything from small children to and foxes. We use this bacon fat and oats along with dandelions, and the bacon fat just brings in all sorts of animals. Everybody loves bacon. Everybody loves bacon. So here's the difference. You were asking, what about lab versus field? So here's the real difference. You can see as the ground soil temperature starts to cool, the marmots can drop their body temperature even further and further. Notice that these guys are hibernating for nearly a month. Okay, for nearly a month. Whereas in the lab, unfortunately, because of the fact that we're under government regulations about checking them and making sure they're okay, their body temperatures don't actually stay down as long. They're disturbed to a significant extent. Although they do show the same typical patterns. They drop their body temperature and they rewarm, but they just do it much more frequently. So there is a real difference between field-caught animals, or field animals that are allowed to remain out in the field, and lab animals, which are held in a big cold room, essentially. Okay, so we do lots of different lab work and on these guys, and we measure their fat using an EM scanner. We can, without doing an invasive surgery, we can measure how much fat they have on them. We take blood samples from them and look at their insulin levels, their glucose levels, look at their fat levels, etc. Because one of the questions that we were very concerned with is the fact that these animals get fat in order to survive. So if they get so fat during the fall, why don't they die of heart attacks? Why don't they suffer from obesity and all the obesity-related diseases like humans do? And as you saw earlier, they can double, almost triple their body mass, and most of that is in the form of fat. So that was a big question. That one, plus the fact that they stop eating. So that kind of gives you the answer to why they don't develop obesity, okay, is the fact that, and they get to a certain body mass, they also look at food and they say, thank you, I'm good, and I can make it. And how they know that they have enough fat to make it for the next almost 7 months, God only knows. We still haven't figured that one out. But they do seem to know when they can stop eating and just survive off of their fat. And the kind of fat is very important, as we'll see in a little bit here. So if we look at the sort of cycle of these animals under the burrow, what we find is during the summer is the fattening phase. So all through, from right now, basically July, August, September, these guys are gaining weight in the form of fat. And sometime in the fall, usually a 4 to 6 week period, the marmots and ground squirrels will say, okay, I've got enough. I can go below the ground and hibernate and stop eating. And so they'll stop eating and hibernate and go through those torpor bouts all the way till spring. Now, we do know that reproductive hormones play a major role in waking them up in the spring. And so there's a little bit of a competition environmentally between waking up too early to find where Sally was hibernating and you know, using up all your fat stores when winter is still going, and you may not find Sally's burrow, and next thing you know, you're dead. So there's a trade-off between waking up too early or waking up too late, and then you miss out on all the reproduction that's going on. Okay, so there's that fine line in there, and what happens is that males will wake up earlier, and they also need to wake up earlier, meaning that they get their body temperature back up, so that they can undergo gonadal recrudescence, and that means their gonads become active again. So they have to be at high body temperature to produce viable sperm. Likewise, the females say, well, I'm not going to come above ground and be subjected to this carnage that's going on until I'm really ready to reproduce. So females will stay below ground and avoid males until they are reproductively competent and ready to go. But during this time period, as you know here in Glacier View, there's very little to eat. So there's not a big feeding period at this point in time. They are really still living off of their fats and their fat stores. And notice I've said they don't store food like tree squirrels or certain other ground squirrels that will actually store food. These hibernators do not store food in their burrow. So they are literally living off of their endogenous fat the whole time. So once they've mated though and reproduced, then the males will go off in different territories, but the females will then get down to the business of having young. Gestation period for marmots is about 22 to 24 days. Ground squirrels about 19 to 20 days. So they'll have their gestation period. The animals, though, will give birth below ground, and the babies don't come above ground until they're ready to be weaned. So that usually is late June for most of the marmots and the ground squirrels. You'll start to see animals come above ground.
I have a question.
Pouches, right?
Yes, they do.
But they don't use it to cache food, they just,
No.
to go hide someplace where it's
No,
safe?
the only thing that golden male males will cache is mushrooms. They actually will cache some mushrooms, but that's all we've ever found in their burrows. Now, you may be thinking about chipmunks, and that's something that I teach in my mammalogy class. I make sure that my students can identify the difference between a chipmunk and a ground squirrel. Chipmunks have eye stripes.
Yep.
Ground squirrels, and if we go back to my earlier picture, you'd see that. Ground squirrels do not have eye stripes. They have an eye ring, but no eye stripe. Okay? And chipmunks, yes, they even have bigger cheek pouches, and they use those for storing food. Chipmunks have to store food to make it through the winter.
Around my house, I've only seen the golden mantle
Mantle.
ground squirrels do that.
And they do, they'll stuff the thing, but
In
then
fact, we had
they,
a bear come to feed her up on our deck, knocked it down. And, of course, these guys just,
oh, yeah,
their
yeah,
heads
oh,
are
yeah,
deformed because of their cheek patch.
right,
Pouches.
yeah. But they actually are not storing it. They'll go down and they'll eat it. They'll finish eating it, but they'll eat it below ground. So here, in fact, is a pregnant female. It's hard to see with the light. She was actually about, well, she was older than 18. She was 18 years old when I caught her. But she's been tagged. Turned out she has a little ear tag by another marmot researcher. This is up at RMBL near Gothic or Crescent Butte, Colorado. And this marmot was probably 22 years old. She had a great den. She was pregnant then, and she's not tame. She's actually knocked out. She didn't just let us hold her. But she gave birth to 4 pups that year, and we studied her for several years. And so in the spring, they wean them out somewhat lean, except for the fact that they're pregnant at that point in time.
How long do marmots live?
Okay, so the longest one, that's one of the longest ones that we know about in the wild. And she was at least 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. Most of the time, they only live to be about 6 to 8 years old, okay? Because there's pretty high mortality, both on the young and also the adults. The yellow-bellied marmot is a polygynous group where there'll be an adult male and several females. And the male will run off all the 2-year-old males. Once the male marmot gets to be about 2 years old, the adult male on the territory will push them off to make them go disperse and start their own colony. So that's when a lot of predation occurs, is on the 2-year-olds and 3-year-old animals. Sometimes the mom will also push her daughters off colony if there's not enough space for all the family members. So they get fat, yes, they really do get fat in the fall. And also notice that since they're not eating, their intestine actually shrinks down. They don't keep their intestine very, very thick because of the fact that they're not eating, so there's no reason to have a big gut. So we studied the seasonal cycles. So as you would expect, the fat cells get big. So they're small in the spring, and they get very large by September, and then by January, February, they're starting to decrease again as the animal's losing weight and utilizing its fat pads to stay alive. So there's a very nice cycle throughout the year. And as I say, it's kind of like being a yo-yo dieter because of the fact that they are eating and then starving themselves, eating and then starving themselves. So they eat, and then a downward pointing arrow suggests their body mass starts to go down, and it drops precipitously throughout the winter. And then as they come out of hibernation, they start to eat as food becomes available. So this circannual cycle occurs year after year after year. It's a very, very nice cycle in body mass. And it's also true that the cells also cycle just like that. Now, one of the things that we started to study in animals getting fat are the essential fatty acids. These are acids that can't be made by the body, they must be included in your diet, and they include linoleic acid and linolenic acid. So these are fatty acids that are found in nuts and green leafy vegetables in particular. Linoleic acid is found in your nuts quite a bit, and linoleic acid found in your green leafy vegetables. And
Horrible on my diet.
so you need those to be able to survive. And a colleague of mine who studies marmots, he found out that the yellow-bellied marmot would actually increase its home range for certain plant species. So we thought, why would they do that unless it was for something that was essential? And we thought it might be the essential fatty acids that are in those green leafy plants. So we did a study where we went out and we analyzed the 9 favorite marmot plant species that they really enjoy. But let me first show you that the diet, this is why these fatty acids are important. These are involved with vision and reproduction and immune system. Racemic acid is involved in membrane formation. Again, prostaglandins are involved in reproduction. Leukotrienes are involved with your immune system. So you have to have linoleic acid and linoleic acid from the diet to be able to properly seed, to properly undergo reproduction and parturition, and to have a functioning immune system. So you don't need a lot of them, but you do need some. So we gave animals a controlled diet that had the essential fatty acids and an EFA deficient diet, one that did not have it. And first I was, as a scientist, I had to show that the animals ate both diets without any differences, which they did. The group that had the EFA diet ate just as much of the diet and was isocalorically the same as the animals that got the diet with the essential fatty acids. But then we wanted to determine who hibernated better, those that had the essential fatty acid or those that did not have the essential fatty acids. And it was very, very clear that if you have the essential fatty acids, you remain in hibernation longer, and you have very nice long bouts, which means you use less energy over the course of the winter. Those that had the deficient diet were hibernating less and coming out of hibernation more. And believe me, to bring your body temperature up from basically 5 degrees to 35 degrees requires a lot of energy. That's a very costly energetic arousal. Okay, it costs a lot of, if you burn a good portion of your fat, coming up, bringing your body temperature, all those cells up, back up to 35 degrees. So it was very clear that the animals who had the essential fatty acids hibernated better and would probably not die in hibernation. These guys are apt to use up all their fat during the winter and die in hibernation. You'll never see them again because they'll never come back above ground.
And does this altitude provide the nutrition that?
So these were the 9 favorite plant species. Okay, and yes, the altitude, the environment does, but they were expanding their home range to get some of these plants to make sure they were eating them. Okay, and when we did a totally blind, double-blind experiment, so we didn't know what the fatty acid content was of the plant species, nor did we know which plant species were which. And so we asked, well, which plant species has the most amount of essential fatty acids in it? And it turns out that it's Heracula lanthanum. Cow parsnip has just a lot of the 18-2 and 18-3 in its leaves and stems and flowers. Okay? And that also turns out to be the plant species that the marmots increase their home range for. So, and when I gave this talk in Alaska, they said, well, of course it's cow parsnip, because it's a cold, hardy plant. It has a long chain polyunsaturates, so it comes up first. So everybody eats that. The deer and the elk and everybody, they all know that. They all come and eat the cow parsnip. Well, the experiment then to do is to somehow or another not allow them to eat cow parsnip first, but save it for later in the summer and see if they would choose something else. So it's a little bit of a difficult experiment, but indeed, the animals did still choose the cow parsnip. which was high in the essential fatty acids. Also, notice that the second favorite was Terraculum officinale. Does anybody know what that species is?
Dandelions?
Yes, dandelions. Dandelions. People make dandelion wine and everything else. Dandelions are, people use dandelions in their salads. Absolutely. Dandelions are very good and they're perfectly good to eat and have a fair amount of
Can you eat
essential
cow
fats.
parsnips?
You can eat cow parsnip too, but you want the tender young leaves.
Oh.
As it gets older, like this plant, unless you need a lot of fiber, you're not eating it. Those are not fiber. But the flowers also have a lot. And you'll see ground squirrels and chipmunks eating the yellow flowers of the terraculum, the dandelions. So anyway, so that really showed that essential fatty acids were important. Well, as a scientist, we have to show, well, is that just true for marmots and ground squirrels? Well, I had other colleagues who were also looking at EFA deficient diet, they were looking at controlled diets, they were looking at diets that were highly unsaturated. And as you can see, for the 4 species that were looked at here and other studies that were done by other scientists, you see that in every single case, the saturates compared to the control, which had the essential fatty acids, or this one had more essential fatty acids, the saturates were always lower and hibernated less than the animals that had high polyunsaturates. So you need your polyunsaturates. And guess what? How many people in here take fish oil? Okay, that's very good for you. It's very good for you. You're getting your essential fatty acids. And that's one reason why they suggest taking fish oil. It really helps you with your membranes, vision, immune system, etc. So these animals knew that instinctively, and that's what they go after. Okay, well, as I mentioned, they also get fat. So why don't they die from obesity? And why don't they have heart attacks when they get to their total, their highest body mass? Why don't they show hyperinsulinemia, hyperglycemia, peripheral insulin resistance? These are typical physiological consequences of obesity that we see in humans and in other animals as well. So we decided to study the insulin pathway, and as you know, insulin allows glucose to be taken up in the muscle into the fat cells, and if you don't have the right amount of insulin, then you become diabetic, and you've got to get more insulin to be able to get the glucose, which is energy, into your fat cells. But too much of it, okay, or too little, is a bad thing. So first we asked, what does it look like in these animals? And as we found, and as we suspected, as the animals were eating throughout the summer and fall, their insulin levels were going sky high. So they, in fact, were showing hyperinsulinemia. As they ate, their pancreas was producing more and more insulin to try to get that glucose into the fat cells. The fat cells were getting bigger, but the fat cells were becoming also resistant to the action of insulin, and therefore insulin or glucose would circulate back around again, having not taken up the glucose, and would stimulate more insulin to be released. But at some point, here what you have to remember, all of a sudden it drops. And it drops because the animals say, I'm not hungry anymore. I'm going to stop eating. So their insulin levels, right, so their insulin levels drop down. Now, this is unlike humans who go to a restaurant and eat, and you eat, and you have a very nice meal, and you think to yourself, I'm full, I'm good, this has been a very nice meal. And then they bring out the dessert cart. And you say to yourself, well, physiologically there may not be a need, but psychologically I need to have that eclair or that piece of chocolate cake. I haven't had that kind of chocolate cake before. And there goes your diet, there goes another 1,000 calories, which means you really need to go to the gym and work out for a good couple of hours to burn off the fat, because it's much more energy dense.
Do they maintain a constant glucose level?
So yes, during the winter time,
or during these,
during the winter, glucose just stays at a basal level the whole time.
what about when that insulin gets up so high in September?
Well, the glucose level still goes up because the cells aren't taking up glucose as rapidly. And that's why more insulin is being released. It's because the glucose isn't being taken up into the muscle and fat cells as readily as it would be when they're in the feeding state during the early summer. So they do show, this is a good example of the insulin resistance. Same amount of glucose is being injected in all 4 seasons. And as you see here in the spring, they're very insulin sensitive, and the glucose the plasma insulin goes up and it comes right back down again. And for a certain bolus of glucose. Same is true for winter. In the summer, you see that bolus of glucose is causing a little more insulin to be released, and in the fall, it's astronomical. They're very peripherally desensitized to insulin, and the glucose is just causing more and more insulin to be released from the pancreas. So they're highly peripherally insulin resistant during that point in time. If you look at their glucose levels, I just showed the fall. You see here you're injecting glucose, but the glucose levels don't even fall. Injecting insulin actually, you're doing an insulin injection, and the glucose levels don't even fall. And it's not because the insulin can't work, because we use the same insulin that they have, but the glucose levels don't fall significantly at all when you inject insulin. So they are really peripherally resistant. And the reason how they get out of it is because of the fact that they stop eating. And they become sensitive again in the spring. And their fat cells, as you saw, get a lot smaller in the springtime. So the other question, of course, that we had was, well, how do they regulate their food intake? What makes them say, okay, I have had enough food, I don't need to eat anymore? So I had a little come to Jesus talk with the Marmots. I sat down, and you see, he's very interested in that chicken bone because he really wants to put on fat and get fat as quickly as possible. So this actually it was totally illegal, but it's many years ago. I was actually up in Yosemite, and I was in Yosemite as a young starting graduate student, and I said, well, let's see if this guy will really come out for food like they say they do. And he did. He sat down and we had a little talk about it. Oops. What did I do? Okay. So one of the hypotheses about food intake is that your brain somehow or another monitors how much energy you have on you. And we used to think that was based on the amount of fat that you have on yourself. And that sends a signal back to the brain that says, okay, I've got enough energy, I can stop eating, I can hibernate, etc. So as you see, this particular molecule, AMPK, it's adenosine monophosphate kinase, it is involved with food intake in the hypothalamus. It's involved with bone, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you see that it stimulates fat oxidation. It stimulates glucose uptake. It does a lot of things here that are basically anabolic, causing you to take up glucose and like that. And it also inhibits then fatty acid synthesis and lipolysis. So it's causing you to take up and store fat as much as you possibly can by stimulating, as I said, lipolysis, inhibiting lipolysis and stimulating the uptake of energy. And so we asked the question, this is a synthetic, this is a real enzyme in your brain, in cells in the brain. It also inhibits insulin secretion. It inhibits the fatty acid synthesis that occurs in liver. So we asked the question, if your brain is monitoring energy levels, then it must be monitoring ATP and AMP. Okay? ATP means you have a lot of energy, you're producing a lot of ATP, you've got a lot of energy. AMP means that you don't have a lot of energy. So a decrease in metabolic fuels like hypoglycemia initiates or stimulates the hypothalamic AMPK that you just saw, which then activates many counter-regulatory responses, including endocrine responses, and it causes a decrease in the metabolic energy fuels. Whereas ACAR is a chemical analog of AMP, and it acts to mimic the effects of a high AMP. So simply put, if you have a lot of AMP, you think you're starving, okay? And if you have a lot of ATP, you think you're flush. You've got lots of fat, you've got lots of energy, okay? So, and it turns out that AMP regulates AMPK. It is a kinase, so it stimulates many different enzymatic reactions, physiological reactions in the different cells of the body. And if you have increasing levels of AMP, then you think you're starving, and it should initiate feeding. Okay, does everybody kind of follow that? So this is a chemical analog. AMP is real, that's in your blood and in your cells, as is AMPK. But you can use this as a mimic to stimulate the effect of a high AMP level. Okay? So our experiment was we would inject ACAR into the vesicles or close to the arcuate nucleus in the hypothalamus, where we know that's involved with feeding. And we should be able to get marmots to basically wake up and feed in the middle of winter when they know, or they should know, that they got lots of fat and they would have made it through the winter. So we're short-circuiting whatever feedback loop is telling them that they're okay. Okay? That was our hypothesis. So we implanted the animals with cannula close to the feeding center in the arcuate nucleus. And after recovery, we started monitoring their food intake, and then we connected them with either a saline control solution or with ACAR, and asked the question, monitoring their food and body temperature, what would happen during the time that they received either saline or the control or ACAR. Okay? So these were the animals, saline infused, really showed very little intake. This is really spillage. There's no real intake here in our data. And then we started the Alcet pumps here in December when the animals shouldn't be eating. And the ACAR infused animals all of a sudden just woke up and started eating. And they ate 10 times what was, our spillage before. So they really did wake up and they started eating. There was food in their gut. And as the pumps, the amount of ACAR in the pumps decreased and dwindled back to zero, their food intake went down. Now, scientists being doubting Thomases that they are, we had to show them more data than just what was going on with food intake. So here's an example of their body temperature. This animal had been hibernating perfectly well, and then we infused the ACAR, and the animal stayed awake. He stayed awake the whole time, and we were able to show too by pictures that they had food in their gut. And he actually ate, and when the pump stopped, he went right back into hibernation again. Okay? Suggesting that, yes, the amount of energy and the regulation of food intake is somehow coupled to the amount of ATP or AMP that the brain is seeing in the cerebrospinal fluid and perhaps in the blood. Similarly, animals on saline, they let their body temperature drop and they try to hibernate.
But it took about a month for it to
So-
kick in? Didn't it take about a month for it to kick in? Weren't you on the previous slide?
Oh, no.
Let's go back 2 slides.
It was immediate, right?
This is about a week. It's a 7-day pump.
Yeah, but you started on the 12th of November.
Right, that's,
You didn't see the increase until the 10th.
no. The pump is only a 7-day pump. So we didn't hook up the pump. This is all controlled.
Uh-huh,
We didn't hook up the pumps until they're here.
I see.
Okay, so we only hooked up the pumps because they're only 7-day pumps where they actually pumps it into the brain. So we only had enough ACOT for 7 days. So we monitored them for a good month beforehand to show that they weren't eating, their body temperature was normal, they were hibernating, etc.
I'm not gonna come and sit with you. You're gonna treat me like that.
You're gonna pump stuff
Oh,
in
Yeah, we're in government trials right now for humans. So,
So you put the
but-
cannula in the brain,
sorry?
like you cannulated the brain,
Yes,
so you went through the
yeah,
skull and
yeah.
She knew
So we have a
exactly
little candle that goes down, very fine, and then we plug it up, and then we have the tube from the outset mini pump, which is based on body temperature and fluids moving in the body. It actually releases, it's an osmotic pump, so it releases its contents and goes into the tube and then goes down into the brain. So, yeah,
crazy.
it's pretty cool. And the marmots are fine. I mean, the marmots are fine. You take the cannula out and they're perfectly fine.
And
They act normally. Now you might ask, well, how come these guys don't only hibernate to about 25 degrees? Well, that's because the pumps don't work if they go below 25 degrees. So we had to actually increase the ambient temperature of the cold room to about 25. And that way the pumps continue to work. Because at low body temperature, as we were just saying, cells don't work, fluid doesn't work, the heart rate, it's only 2 beats per minute. Nothing works when they're way down here close to zero. So we had to actually raise the ambient temperature of the cold room to make the pumps work. Okay. So that's where we are with food intake. We know that there is some kind of signal that it's feeding back that's telling them, and it's probably energy related, telling them that they can turn off their food intake and survive. A colleague of mine, Seth Donahue, who used to be at CSU and now he's gone to University of Massachusetts, UMass. Unfortunately, he and I did a lot of experiments together. He is a mechanical engineer and very interested in bone mass. And so one of the observations that he likes to draw upon is the fact that you got a couch potato for 7 months. You got an animal sitting down in a burrow, doesn't move. Even when they arouse from hibernation, you saw their body temperature come up, they really don't go and read a book. They may void themselves in some metabolic waste, but they basically stay still. And they stay still for months or in weeks. And if you were put at Poudre Valley Hospital for a week, your bone mass already starts to decrease. You start to lose bone mass, okay? So the question is, why don't these guys lose bone mass? Is it because of temperature, being ambient temperature, which I should have told you. If you keep the hibernators at a high ambient temperature so they can't hibernate, they still don't eat. Okay? So it's not temperature. They still don't eat. But what happens is they burn through their fat faster, and therefore they come out of the hibernation state earlier, and they're looking for food because they've burned off their fat faster. Similarly, if you put them at high ambient temperature, they still don't lose bone mass. Okay? They have a remodeling and a formation and degradation rates that appear to be balanced all through hibernation. That's what I'm basically going to show you. So we've already talked about this, interval arousal, but they don't move around. They are bed rested. Why don't they lose bone mass? And it's true for all. He's done everything from bears to pocket mice, and none of them lose bone mass. So we looked at the cortical properties. He does. He looks at the cortical properties of bone, mechanical properties, and he looks at the shafts here, the geometrical properties, and he looks at the trabecular processes of the bone. And these, we're mostly looking at femurs on these guys. And when we do all those measurements, when we look at their trabecula and we look at their remodeling and degradation, we find that there's no difference between active and hibernating. It's phenomenal. It's unaffected by hibernation. Okay, so and that's for the cortical. That was for the golden mountain ground squirrel. Here's for the Arctic ground squirrel. No difference in the Arctic ground squirrels. And I can show you slide after slide for bones of bears as well. He's got a lot of bear papers. And it's also in marmot. It wasn't significant between post and pre-hibernation, and it wasn't affected in the little tiny pocket mice who undergo daily torpor. They still, no trabecular bone differences. And so he and I wrote a grant to the National Science Foundation, which we got, and we've been studying endocannabinoids, we've been studying leptin, and I do basically the physiology, he does all the mechanical bone properties, and we discovered that endocannabinoids, which are in the brains of all of these animals, including ourselves, go sky high, and these, like 90-fold. And so we think that there must be a relationship between energy and food intake and endocannabinoids and how they affect the receptors, actually affect bone receptors in the hibernators. So this is another study. So the title of my talk was, are these good models? They're excellent models, I feel. NIH, not so much. They don't want to give us the money. We hammer them all the time for money, but up until a little while ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, they wouldn't even admit that hibernation would be good for sending a man to Mars and learning how does a bear suppress its metabolism. Even though it's biology, you think, it's the Arrhenius equation. As temperature drops, so do all physiological processes. Well, the bear, it drops only about 6 to 8 degrees, but its metabolic rate goes down 100-fold. So it has to be suppressed. It's not based on temperature, okay? Its temperature doesn't suppress it because its body temperature doesn't go that low. So we know that these animals are producing something that can suppress their metabolic rate, okay? Bone volume and strength are completely preserved. We do all the measurements in a delicate machine that he's got that shows the tensile strength and the breaking strength of the different bones. And the animals are balancing remodeling and degradation all winter long so that they keep their bone strength. And really, they got to. Who'd want to come out of hibernation? You'd be eaten in a minute. You'd be lost in a minute. So
Jane's right over there, I can't get to her.
So you got to keep your strength up. You got to keep your strength
What
up.
about muscle tone?
The mass and.
The muscle. That's a good point. They burn fat, as I've alluded to full time. However, you cannot burn fat efficiently in the Krebs cycle. Those of you who might be retired biochemists, you cannot burn fat efficiently unless you burn muscle as well. So their muscle mass is decreasing, albeit much slower than the fat mass. But to keep the Krebs cycle intermediates going, you've got to burn some muscle. And alanine and a few other key muscle components are in that cycle that they get from muscle mass. So yes, their muscle mass does decrease, but not as fast as their fat mass. So big males will put on a lot of muscle as well as fat. And you find animals dying in hibernation with fat still on them because they didn't have enough muscle mass and they started to sacrifice their heart muscle. So it turns out they've got to get muscle. I mean, they do put on, both males and females, put on a fair amount of muscle mass because they do utilize muscle. Not all of it, but they do utilize muscle mass during the hibernation period to be able to burn that fat efficiently. Oops. So it's, as I said, the decrease, the breakdown and the remodeling is balanced. And unfortunately, you can't see it very well in this picture, but it is absolutely balanced throughout the hibernation period. So, I've kept you guys here way too long. What time did we start? So, conclusions. Fatty acids have a profound effect on torpor patterns, metabolism, as you saw. If you don't have the correct essential fatty acids, you're not going to hibernate well. Okay? So, take your fish oil. Hibernators definitely show consequences of human obesity, but they don't suffer from it. Why? Because they stop eating. We always add more calories from the dessert tray. Bone volume and strength are preserved throughout hibernation. And so these animals must have some mechanism, which we're still trying to find out what it is that allows them. It's not temperature, it's not things that we can't measure. It's something in their blood, something about their genetic makeup that's being produced that allows them to have this kind of balanced volume and strength mechanism. And so consequently, I think we still have a lot to learn from these animals, and what we can learn, I think, will help humans in the long run. Unfortunately, it's sad for me to think that I've spent 44 years studying marmots, and this is all that I present all my work in a 55-minute lecture. 44 years of work. Although I did do a lot of teaching during that period. But it's a little sobering to think that, we still don't know a whole lot more. We know a lot more, but don't know a whole lot more. And of course, if I discovered what turns off their appetite, I'd be rich.
Yeah.
Okay? I'd be rich. Because basically what they're doing is switching from a lipogenic state, to in the fall they switch to a lipolytic state, where they can completely live off of their fat. So if I could give each and every one of you a pill that says, okay, you've eaten enough, for today, pop your pill, and it switches your metabolism without you feeling any other deleterious effects. And you just start burning your fat. You see all these ads on television, fat burners. No, they haven't discovered it yet. But that's essentially what these guys can do. And so once we figure out how they are doing it, we will be able to maybe help humans who suffer from obesity. So these are all my colleagues and a number of my students who I've worked with in places that we've gotten the marmots and the grants that I've received over the years to be able to do the research.
Quick question. I had a family of 4 living under my deck next to
These
my
are
house.
marmots.
These are marmots,
The grandkids came to visit.
Could have been the grandkids, Could have been the grandkids. So I just wanted
All right, the mother and the 4 babies were born underneath my deck, evidently. Now, how can they put on enough fat to survive the winter
Yes.
when they only have 3 months?
Yes. Baby marmots we've determined that they have to get up to about 1.1, maybe 1.2 kilograms in body mass. So they're born at about 600, well, born less than that, but about 200 to 300 grams. But then they start putting on mass. Usually by July, they're up to about 600 grams. And by fall, they are up to about 1.1. Now, baby marmots, the first year, they hibernate with their mom. And therefore the mom also provides heat in the burrows to help keep the babies warm. Second year, they'll usually hibernate with their mom. Third year, they get kicked out by everybody.
Okay, let me ask you this. They disappeared about 2 or 3 weeks ago, all the kids,
Oh yeah,
and the mom's still hanging around every once in a while.
right.
Does she throw them out, or
No.
what happens?
So here's the progression into the burrows, basically. First of all, the big males that have reproduced, or not even reproduced, since they're basically just sperm donors earlier on. They are the first. The big males are the first to go down below ground. They'll go below ground in August, and they may come up once every 5 days just to see that the sun is still shining, kind of thing. Go back down. But by September, they're down. They stay down. They don't come back above ground. And they'll also occlude their burrows with a plug so that badgers, weasels, and like that, martins can't get in there. Second are the females that did not reproduce that year. So they will get fat also sooner, faster, and then they will go down and they'll disappear. Obviously, 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds also fatten as fast as they can. And they go down about the same time as females that did not reproduce. The young of the year are getting fat as fast as they can, and the females that were nursing, they're always the last because they've been using all of their energy to nurse the young. So they are usually the last to get fat enough to say, okay, it's time to hibernate. So it's not surprising to me that if you've got all that good garbage and food plants and vegetable garden around your house, that the babies got fat real quick, and you know, she protected them and everything, but she was the last to go down. So the babies, if you've got good nurture around your house, the babies are going to go down very quickly and stay down. The mom still trying to get fat because she's got to double her weight to get more fat to be able to go down into higher.
How do you get them out of there?
See, Fox Acres used to call me. In fact, they still call me.
You want to come over to my place?
Well, you know, if you want to trap them, you can live trap them with bacon fat and oats and some dandelion flowers, particularly when they first come out. The spring is the easiest time to trap because there's not a lot of other choices. So they really do go in for the bacon fat, oats, and dandelions.
Okay.
And then what I always tell people is if you've got one family of marmots living with you, it's probably okay, as long as they aren't undermining your foundation. Now, that's the problem with marmots, is that I've been called to people's houses where the marmots, particularly new construction, the marmots will see, oh, there's a building going up. There's all that good insulation. And they go right up it and they either tear it out and take it to their burrows, or they say, we can hibernate here this winter. And I had a family in Crested Butte who, in the spring, turned on their whole house fan, and all of this marmot dude just came out all over everywhere. Because they had been nesting up above, well, not hibernating.
Hibernating up above.
In the fan, right, in the fan area, in the attic. They had made a complete nest up there, and that fan area had been their toilet place, their bathroom. So I had to go in and trap them out. So those are the ones that become lab animals. They get stuck in the lab. But, you know, one family usually is fine, particularly if they're not destroying your house, and they're kind of fun to watch and everything.
They are.
But they do attract coyotes, they do attract badgers, and so, you know, you do have to.
As predators.
Yeah, those are the predators. The main predators up here are bobcats, coyotes, eagles to some extent. You might see a golden eagle. The golden eagles will take them, but there aren't a lot of eagles up here. It's mostly badgers. Foxes will take the young ones. A big adult male can fend off a fox or a weasel. So bobcats, coyotes, and bears, mountain lions will stray through, but badgers are the other one. And badgers can do a lot of damage. And of course, when you've got a golf, country club golf course like Fox Acres does, the badgers come in and they put holes where they're not supposed to be.
I got it.
So I have to limit the rodent population there because otherwise they just get too many. So.
Well, now that you mentioned the ceiling thing, while they hibernate, do they defecate?
Oh yeah, they will defecate during hibernation. Okay, and occasionally urinate because they do develop some metabolic waste, and that was what we thought might cause the arousal. They wake up to pee. And so some guys catheterize their bladders and put pee in. And physiologists do all kinds of things. You gotta rule things out. And so we did that, and it turned out that no, their bladder can be as big as a house, and that doesn't wake them up. It's not what causes it. And we also thought maybe they wake up to sleep, because you have sleep deficit. But it turns out it's not, again, it's not the major reason or a reason that they wake up for the arousals. So yeah, and their pellets, okay, are about this big in the summer and spring when they're feeding, and they're about this big because all they're getting rid of are dead cells and the stuff cells from their gut. So their pellets are very, very small during hibernation. But remember, when they're making their burrow, it's summertime. So they've got all of the, all the dew is being made. It's not during the summer and fall. It's not so much during the winter time that they're producing feces. The feces that came down in the thing with the buildup from the summer and the fall.
Okay.
Question there?
Yeah, so the big males go down around August, so they must have a TV because it's football season.
Exactly.
You change your picture about the borough.
That's not, I can change this. They're actually watching sports, exactly, exactly.
If the critters are living in a house where it does not really get cold, will they hibernate if they?
Yes, they'll still try to hibernate, so.
In the
you know,
house where it's up under the
Right,
insulation where.
it's just that they'll be more active.
Mm.
They'll be more active if they're in an environment or a house that is insulated and you're turning the thermostat
Yeah.
on. Now, they love old cabins. They love old cabins that have or very little insulation and nobody's living in it and like that. They'll inhabit old cabins and their foundations and their roofs and like that because it's warmer than going down in a burrow. Plus, it's harder for predators to get them if they're in a building. So it's hard for them to be dug out.
Well, thank you, Greg, for that.
Yeah.